KoitCast.
Today's guest is a UFO researcher and investigator for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. He's authored over 25 books on the paranormal and has made numerous appearances on UFO and paranormal podcasts and TV shows, last seen by me on Ancient Aliens. A massive big Koit welcome to you, Preston Dennett.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No worries, and thank you for agreeing to this podcast. I was just saying to you prior to actually starting the record button, I've talked to some fabulous people doing this podcast series, but I think this topic for me is the one that really, really gets me excited. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Yeah, I love it too.
Excellent. Okay, so I've given an intro about you there, but in your own words, I suppose, who are you? Where'd you come from?
Yeah, well, I mean, what can I say? I come from a pretty big family. I thought we were all skeptics. It turned out I was wrong about that. I was skeptical of UFOs and the paranormal, but that all changed when I was 21 years old in 1986, when I heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. It's a pretty famous case if you know a lot about UFOs, but I didn't believe that it was real. I thought this pilot was lying.
That's the Japanese airline one, is it?
Yeah, JAL Airlines.
Excellent.
Yeah. It's a great case, but
yeah, very much so. Would you want to give a quick synopsis of that for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah. Well, I was watching the news, and all they really said was, "Look, this crazy pilot thinks he saw something. Have you ever seen anything?" And the other newscaster was like, "No, I haven't. Have you?" And he's like, "No." And that's really all they said on the news. But later, of course, I learned that this was a fantastic sighting with the Captain Kenju Torochi and his crew. Basically were paced by two very large UFOs, larger than their jet, for almost an hour. It was on their radar. There were ground witnesses. The FAA also said it was on their radar, which they later denied. But we now know that they did catch this on radar. Yeah, it was a great case.
So lots of evidence, essentially, to put this big case together. So you were initially skeptical, and then you heard about that. What changed your mind then? Was it just that?
That was sort of
it, or?
Yeah, that's kind of what sent all the dominoes tumbling down, because I just assumed this wasn't real. I hadn't looked into the evidence. But my brother Mark, my older brother, said he'd seen a UFO years earlier, actually, and I didn't believe him then. So I asked him now about, what he saw, and I was really impressed. He described how he had a sighting with his two friends while driving through Reseda, not far from where we lived at that time in Southern California. Mm-hmm. And he chased this object, he and his friends, for about 15 minutes. And it was your classic saucer with little lights on it, a dome, silver, silent, treetop level. It was a really interesting sighting. And,
and you gave him, I presume you gave him a hard time, did you, when you were...
A little bit, yeah, I did. And he's like, "Listen, if you don't believe me, talk to Phil and Greg." Those were his friends.
Yeah.
So, I did. And they backed his story up. And that's when I started to ask other people. And I got a huge shock when I realized that I knew several people, many actually, who had encounters.
Okay, so obviously you mentioned there that you were in shock. Not a lot of people would have necessarily gone through that paradigm shift of believing completely one thing to then 180-degree turn to, believing something else. What went through your mind with that? How did you feel?
Yeah, well, I wasn't happy. I mean, it was really upsetting in a lot of ways. And I think sort of why I'm still doing this, because it took me years really to wrap my head around it. I felt scandalized. I felt lied to. I mean, these were people I loved and trusted, my family, my friends, my coworkers, who were basically lying to me. So yeah, really upsetting and very difficult to deal with. My whole belief system really kind of collapsed, especially when I found out that so many people I knew were having these encounters. And it was upsetting. This wasn't being taught in schools. It wasn't being taken seriously in the media. And there was a government cover-up with my tax dollars and all of our money.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
So, yeah, upsetting on a lot of levels. And especially when, I got into this, and there were lots of skeptics around me who I started clearing rooms when I'd bring this up. People would roll their eyes at me and, basically thought I was out of my mind. But
Yeah, very
it became
much so.
pretty clear to me that this was real. And yeah, I became, in a weird way, more skeptical because I had to reevaluate everything.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Obviously, yeah, so you have to literally build from the ground up again. Um, so I think you mentioned something interesting there. In that years ago, I mean, I'm 48. I believe you're slightly older than myself. Back then, there were, like you said, there's hardly any books on the subject. I think the books that there were there were tended to be like picture books for children, because that's how I found my introduction to the subject. It was never taken seriously, and we were completely ridiculed in the press. But nowadays, that's almost completely flipped, isn't it? We've
Yeah,
made massive strides.
yeah, it's amazing to hear this subject being talked about seriously, in Congress,
Yes,
among senators and representatives. It's
and there's a
been,
lot of whistleblowers as well, aren't there, coming out today?
yeah, which has been going on for years, but
Mm.
now they're really getting some serious attention. I mean, this
What?
subject appeared on 60 Minutes, and yeah, so many reality TV shows are covering it. It's definitely taken a 180-degree turn.
Very
People are
much
taking
so.
it seriously, yeah.
What did you think about the recent whistleblower? I think his name is David Grush, I believe. What
Yeah,
are your thoughts on that subject?
well, I thought it was interesting to say the least. I think he's probably legit in terms of his resume. It does seem to be holding up. I find it interesting that he, in particular, is getting a lot more attention than a long, long line of hundreds of other people who have come forward. And really, we're not getting any of this kind of attention. Perhaps the climate's changed a little bit. His testimony felt very controlled to me, which, as an intelligence officer, I can understand that. I'd like to know what evidence he's talking about. He seemed a bit evasive in some of his answers. And I feel like this whole disclosure process is very tightly controlled. And with our governments having lied about this for, 80, 90 years now, I'm not sure I trust them at all. So I'm
Yeah,
on the
but
fence a little bit.
I agree with you actually on this. I think we're with that chap. We've almost reached that tipping point of, you could argue, the beginning of a soft, disclosure by the governments, couldn't you, from around the world? And do you think it's going to just cascade massively now since that one?
I hope so. I think we have to be clear and make an important point here that this isn't disclosure from our
Oh
governments.
no, no.
You know what I mean? This is just another whistleblower. Our governments have not said a word other than, recently UAPs are real and we don't know what they are, which I think is a flat out lie. I think they do know. I think Roswell was real, the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, and certainly not the only one like that, which David Grush talked about, actually. I agreed with a lot of what he said.
Oh, me too.
So, yeah, I hope, because, we are seeing government study groups being formed, the AARO, AARO. Let me see if I can get this right. The All Domain Anomaly Reconnaissance Office. I think that's right.
I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, that's a new government study. There's, of course, NASA has formed a commission, and they're saying, oh, we don't have enough evidence to draw any conclusions at this point, which made me laugh. I mean, out loud, because the evidence is there.
Well, there's lots of, isn't there video feeds from the NASA missions where they say this is an anomaly? Obviously, we can't say 100% that is a UFO or whatever, but it's potential.
Yeah, I mean, just think about how many satellites we have surrounding our planet. They're telling me they don't have enough evidence of this. It's ridiculous. We
It
have
is ridiculous, I agree.
thousands upon thousands of landing trace cases where UFOs land and leave marks on the ground or burns. I mean, the evidence is absolutely there. Video footage, medical evidence, all kinds of different forms of physical evidence. It's there.
It is, and I just hope it all gets collated soon into a cohesive storyline, where then governments can finally be free to say, all right, look, yes, this has happened. Let's pardon all the people who kept it a secret all these years, and let's just move forward. You know, because I
Yeah.
genuinely don't think that it's such a big secret that it will destroy cohesion in society. Let's be fair. Most people will just look at it and say, "Oh wow, aliens are real." Next day, they'll be going about their daily business,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah. And I think you made an important point. Let's pardon people because, yeah, they've made a lot of mistakes with this cover up, but I don't think there's any reason for finger pointing and punishment. Let's just move forward with truth and transparency.
Yeah, definitely on that one. Right, you've written a shed load of books, and I like the fact that you've actually sort of like narrowed into a specific field on a lot of your topics, such as UFOs at the drive-in, UFOs over Colorado, and things like that. Have you got a current book that you're working on, and is that also laser focused into a specific area?
Oh yeah, yeah. I love kind of picking a topic because this is a niche subject anyway, and it's really interesting when you can just sort of find a little area that hasn't been explored a lot. I love focusing on cases of direct contact, people who've been taken on board. My most recent book, which I'm super happy with because it's doing really well, is called Symmetry. True UFO Adventure, which is all about the experiences of one person. Because many of my books have been collections of accounts, but this is a cohesive narrative all about Dolly Saffron, who's a great witness. I mean, former lifeguard, nurse. She worked in the Department of Defense, so she's a real good witness and has had fully conscious contact her whole life. And by that, I mean she's not experiencing missing time or recovering her experiences through hypnosis. She's not afraid. A lot of people have there's a lot of fear surrounding this subject. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. I'm working on a new book right now about people who've had very close encounters. I love those cases because they have the most information.
Yes, definitely. And actually, that's the next topic of discussion I want to go into. But the Dolly Saffron, I've actually never heard that name. Now, I might have heard of some of the cases because, sometimes the names just go over your head, but then you know the individual case. Can I just ask, is she the lady that had a fetus removed?
That did occur to her, yeah. Though I have to say I've investigated many cases of that. That's not terribly unusual.
No, and it's also quite, not scary, but, disconcerting, I would say, that particular scenario of the alien abduction genre.
Well, she won't call it abduction, actually. She calls it contact. Her experiences are entirely benevolent. She agreed to that, as I think this is actually what is happening in these cases. I know there's a lot of fear surrounding this, and some people feel like they didn't like their experiences and that it was traumatic. But most of the people I've interviewed at some point realize, this is not bad for us. They've gotten a lot out of it. I mean, I did talk to one couple in Canada who had that happen. They had a missing baby taken out of her womb, and she's absolutely okay with it. She tells me she knows her child is safe with the ETs, and she later got to meet the child. So it's this. I know this must sound to skeptics.
Yeah.
I can only imagine because I know I was there once. But this is absolutely happening.
I don't disbelieve the story in itself because I genuinely believe that's happening with the alien abduction. But how do we reconcile in our minds that a mother of whatever variety is completely okay with her child going away? Does that make sense to you? It doesn't to me.
I have to respect the witnesses and how they interpret their experiences because I've heard everything across the board, and this is what most of them are telling me, and it's their experience.
Sure.
So, some people will tell me, no, I didn't like it. I wish they would go away. I wish it never happened. But that's actually quite rare. The vast majority of people I've talked to, and I think this is borne out by other researchers. I'll point to Timothy Good, an English researcher.
Yeah.
But Barbara Lamb, John Mack, Edith Fiore, there's a lot of them. I don't think this is a nefarious phenomenon. I really don't. And I'll tell you why. Because this is what I've focused on, is people who have been taken on board craft. And if you look at it objectively, removing the lens of fear and all the misinformation, and just look at the facts of what actually happens to people who are taken on board, it's very encouraging. It's quite positive. In fact, the subject of my first book was healing cases, because I was getting a lot of them, and this wasn't getting any attention. The media is very fear-based, but people who are taken on board a craft are often healed, and of a wide variety of illnesses and injuries and conditions, and you name it. And I thought, wow, why isn't this being discussed? This is one of the, right? This is one of the main reasons people are being taken on board.
Is that what you've narrowed down to, that sort of like result, that it is a positive experience? Do you think that it is all leading to healing of people?
Yeah, I think so. And I've got the cases that prove it. I mean, the evidence speaks for itself. I try not to impose my own beliefs onto this phenomenon. I'm just reporting what people are experiencing, and that's what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
The worst I hear is the physical exam, because no one likes going to the doctor. I mean, rarely do they. Especially if they're, probing you with instruments and, perhaps doing an operation of some kind. And it can be really scary, especially if the doctor looks a little different than your average human.
Now, obviously, Travis Walton, his was initially broadcast or put out there as a negative experience, but now his recent, talks on the subject for the last 5-10 years or whatever, he believes that they were trying to heal him following being knocked over by the beam. So if that also goes into that camp of healing, can we ask the question, why are they healing us? Obviously, in his scenario, it's completely different, because if they cause the damage, you can understand it. But why would they interfere to heal us?
Well, I've certainly looked into that. I think one thing we need to take into account is the fact that these are all humanoids. They're very much like us. Some look exactly like us. So this really begs the question of how close is our relationship with them? And certainly a lot of contactees get the message that we are you, you are us, we are one. Really, in those exact words. Right. I think this is an important point, because it shows that, these ETs feel a sense of responsibility, I think. But looking into it, because I wanted to know, who's being healed, who's being contacted, why them and not, this person? Because it's evenly divided between men and women. It's very young people, it's old people, it's people of all ancestries. It's all over the world. It's been going on a very long time. And what I found are a few real prominent patterns. One is that if you have a history of contact, if, this is generational, that definitely increases your chances of being healed, because they do seem to track family lines. And I think what's going on here is they're upholding the best of our genetics. I've got several cases that point towards that, which I can go into if you want. But
yes, very much so, because that is going to be one of my questions I asked you, which was going to be, what's the scale or scope of this abduction phenomenon, and where is it leading? So I think that opens the door to give us a few cases.
Yeah, well, one case I always like to mention, because I think it illustrates that point perfectly, is that of Jim Law of Gainesville, Florida, who really wasn't happy about his encounters. He found it quite frightening, but it sort of had so many, he was getting over that, and had the Greys, little gray guys, show up around his bed one day. He'd been recently diagnosed with a hernia, was facing major surgery for it. And he's like, if you're going to take me, why don't you fix this? And they said, okay. Actually, what they said was, and this is pretty much a direct quote, we know of the condition which you speak of, and we will repair it. Speaking telepathically, which is how they always do.
Yeah.
And they did, with a little handheld instrument, very quickly. And he was quite impressed, and he asked them flat out, why are you taking me? Why? And they said, we are interested in your genetic potential to live a long time. Another direct quote from a Gray. And he found that fascinating. Certainly I did too, because his grandfather was 106 years old. He had two aunts who lived past 100. His mom was in her 90s. And I've got other cases like that where contactees are enjoying incredible longevity and health. So I think that speaks towards, what's going on here. They are healing people. Artie Six Killer Clark, she's another researcher I really respect. She's not overlaying her own belief system onto these cases. And she talked about a bicycle racer who was taken on board, and he said afterwards he started winning all his bicycle races. He was faster and stronger. He had basically had a health upgrade. John Mack talked quite a bit about this in his books. So this is what we're seeing. This is why a lot of people are being taken on board. But real quick, asking why some people, not others. Another pattern I saw, which really shocked me, happened when I was interviewing a lady from Norway. I'm talking to people all over the world. It's really amazing. And she had been healed of a chronic back injury. And I was asking her, she described how these grays came through the wall, put an instrument against her back, pulsed energy through it, and walked right out through the wall and were gone. It was a very quick experience. She said it was actually really scary because she's talking, who are you? What are you doing? What's going on? They didn't really communicate. I think because she was in such a panic. She probably couldn't hear them, perhaps. But at any rate, I asked her, do you have a history of encounters? Fully expecting her to say, oh yeah, when I was a little girl, they would come to my room, because that's what I usually hear.
Yeah.
But she said, no, this was a one-off. This has never happened to me before or since. So I started digging deep, because I kept running into this. I'm like, why is this happening to her? And I got the answer when I asked her what she does for a living. And she said, well, actually, I'm retired. I had to retire because of my back. She was a graphics artist. She says, now I'm very active in social work. She works for human rights and animal rights. She says, I'm very well known in my area. Please don't use my name. And of course, I agreed to that, but it rang a bell for me because I had just interviewed Reverend Michael Carter, who had been healed of a blood clot in his leg. And of course, he's received awards for his work on fighting racism. And I thought, well, gosh, there's John Hunter Gray, Dolly Saffron, she's a nurse. Jacques Vallée, he interviewed a doctor who was healed. Started looking at all my cases. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of doctors, several nurses, teachers, social workers, environmentalists, inventors, people who are doing good work for humanity. So this was another sort of indicator that this is, something that's good for humanity, contact. They're trying to help those who help others. In fact, that's exactly what they told a couple I interviewed they said, we weren't abducted, we were invited on board. And
how does that work, the invitation thing? Because I hear stories of people agreeing to this phenomenon. I've heard, the scenario where people have agreed prior to being incarnated, if we believe in that side of things as well, that they've made a soul contract,
Right.
And this is part of it. Do you believe that? Are you getting reported that?
Yeah, I do get a lot of reports. So I will say, I try not to believe anything. I just want to know.
Sure.
But yeah, I certainly have heard that many times. And I do believe it because it keeps coming up. And I think what happens is oftentimes, this is a real controversial aspect of the UFO phenomena, because there are people who are like, are you kidding me? I hate this. I didn't agree to it. And that happens initially with a lot of the people I've interviewed, but later they'll have more encounters. I'm like, you know what? I started to remember, because what happens is people are taken on board and they're in a complete panic. And ETs do not want to scare people. The first thing they will tell you is, do not be afraid. This is absolutely universal. Happens almost every time. Don't be afraid. We won't hurt you. No harm will come to you. You're fine. Calm down. Everything's okay. They will say this over and over again. But we have a very strong fear reaction. people are just generally fear-based.
Yeah, it's the fight or
So,
flight thing, isn't it? I suppose, like inbuilt
yeah.
into us.
So when someone's taken on board and they're in that kind of state of panic, this is when they have missing time. This is when the only thing they remember is seeing these ETs coming at them and being laid out on a table. And no one likes that, but they're missing all the good stuff. And so as they perhaps go under hypnosis or start having fully conscious encounters, that's when they wake up and they realize, oh, I did agree to this.
That's
And
not
I
something
do-
I've heard before, but I kind of like it because it gives answers to questions, which is to say, if you are in that fear state, all other information goes out the window. And for that lady that you reported earlier, Saffron, because she was conscious and relaxed through it, she could remember it all.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people, and those who don't have a strong fear reaction report this. And you can look at this in any other field of research of interviewing people. Anyone who's in a state of panic or scared is not a good observer.
Yes, yeah.
And if you're scared, it's automatic. I can absolutely understand this, to assume this is not good for me. I don't like this. I am scared out of my mind. When really they're just trying to help. And going back to, what happens when people are taken on board, yeah, they're physically examined. That's the scariest thing. I have zero accounts of what I would call sadistic behavior or torturing or ETs, I want to hurt you. No, that's not at all what's happening.
What do you think of the Whitley Strieber one then? Because he initially, didn't he say that he was violated?
Yeah. Yeah, I still think that he feels a little bit that way. I've talked to him many times about it.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of fear. I mean, let's face it, he was a horror writer. He was working his way through, I think, the fear of his contact through, writing fiction about horror novels. So I think, his is a good case of how fear can be a real obstacle to understanding UFO contact, because it did turn around for him. He's had many fully conscious, benevolent contacts. His is a really amazing case. I think he's a great guy. So he's done wonders to popularize this subject. His
Very
book
much so.
woke a lot of people up.
Initially scared people with that image on the front cover, to be fair.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I get it. I mean, I can see why this would be scary. But there's, a number of reasons for it. It's not just the encounter itself. It's the media pushing out fear on, every channel. It is a concerted government campaign to paint this subject in a negative light. And we know this because there are things called MILABs, military abductions, which are basically horrific, mind control programs, which are faking ET abductions and making it look absolutely horrific. There's liars in this field. This cover-up is no joke. It's not speculative. It's absolutely easily demonstrable.
So do you think, regarding the government interference, the Men in Black phenomenon is via them, not the ETs?
Yeah, I think people are actually conflating two things here. Men in Black, the true Men in Black, is a different phenomenon, which is quite unusual, and I think probably ET related, involving very strange figures who don't look fully human. People often talk about Men in Black as government agents who come in and scoop up, UFO evidence and threaten witnesses. So I think we've got two different things going on here. I've certainly talked to contactees who had government interference. That's not unusual. I had a guy whose contact notes were stolen out of his house. I told him, write down everything that happens to you. That's the first thing I tell people who are having this experience. Let's write this down. This will give you a record. This is therapeutic. You can see exactly what's happening to you. And I think it will help you work through the whole experience. And he was doing that. And his house was broken into, and they didn't take his stereo or his TV or anything except his contact notes. So
And what does that tell you? Yeah.
Right? And I had a lady whose hypnosis tapes were stolen. Same thing. That was it. With Dolly Saffron, who I've met face to face, I watched government agents follow us from the UFO convention where I was speaking, and she was with me in the car, and we were followed back to the Airbnb that we had rented out, which was on many side streets. So I'm like, seems like this guy's following me. And then I took a turn, and sure enough, and then several more turns, and followed all the way. And the darn guy parked right in front of the driveway, blocking it, and glared at us.
And you could tell it was a government agent rather than just some weirdo stalking you, yeah?
Well, I mean, I couldn't say for sure, but it was certainly nothing I've experienced. Well, I won't say that entirely, because I have had a few things. I've never quite been followed by that. But yeah, I've had a few weird occurrences that I think, because we do know as UFO researchers, there's some researchers who looked into this, that we're also being monitored and tracked and have little government files on us. Jim and Cora Lorenzen discovered that way back in the 1950s. So yeah, our governments are watching, well, maybe not governments, but certainly the cabal or who's ever behind this is watching contactees and researchers and anything. Probably this show. Just saying.
Hold on, there might be somebody outside. Well, I've always thought, right, you know, like if you speak to a person who has had an encounter, and at some point, if they had evidence, be it photography or whatever, or on their phone and that, I always think if that ever happened to me, I'd aim to keep some measure of recorder by the door, and then whenever anyone came, you'd record it if you look and saw someone official. Do you know what I mean? Is there ever been any cases of that where people are prepared for government potential people and have got video of them or anything?
Yeah, certainly. There's, if you look into the whole history of this sort of thing, there's a lot of cases like that. I mean, one case, I honestly can't remember the full details on it, but this guy was a government whistleblower and had agents come into his house, and he is also very much trained in self-defense. And when the guys refused to identify themselves and became hostile, he basically took them down, tied them up, called the police. It was a big to-do. And he almost got in trouble for it because these guys were not, of course, who they said they were.
Yeah.
But they weren't arrested. There was no record. They were some high-level intelligence agency, apparently. And he nearly lost his job over it, but he didn't, because he was like, listen, they came into my house and became hostile. But there's a lot of cases of government interference and cases of really suspicious deaths. Like James Forrestal is a very well-known case where he supposedly committed suicide by jumping out of his hospital room. But
yes. There's a lot of that going on in Russia at the moment, I believe.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we know from this side of things that the government are trying to muddy the waters, or these agencies, shall we say, are muddying the waters. To what end? Because if we believe that the alien phenomenon is a healing process for the general good of humanity, what that's essentially saying is that this cabal is trying to suppress the good of humanity, or at least the knowledge of the potential of humanity. Why?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think ultimately it comes down to greed, power, control, money. I think that they know full well that this is a benevolent phenomena, and that what will happen is if these ETs come down, and I mean, we have free energy, right? Sorry, my computer's going crazy.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is we have this ET technology. We have an oil-based economy, and we don't need it, but they want the money. I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. There is an ET threat, and the ET threat is to their control, their power over humanity. They're taking all the wealth. The wealth is not evenly distributed in this world. There's a very small portion, 1%, we all know this, that has most of the wealth, 99% of it. It's ridiculous.
So ultimately, you think we can narrow this down to good versus evil?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I feel like these people who are the cabal do not have our best interests in mind. The highest levels of the military-industrial complex. I'll name names in terms of organizations. I don't have any problem with that. I think it's the oil industry, the insurance industry, the banking industry, the pharmaceutical industry. All of these guys, I think, don't have our best interests in mind. The intelligence agencies, which are not elected, the highest levels of our military. And it's not just in the UFO field. I mean, look at what they've done to citizens. They are funding both sides of countries to fight wars.
Yes,
providing
we know that's
weapons.
true.
They are irradiating soldiers with radiation, poisoning them. They have fed them hallucinogenics. They have infected them with venereal disease. How is this to anyone's benefit?
Well, it's not, is it? It's a disgusting side of humanity.
Yeah.
So what will be, because I know I mentioned earlier that we're almost at a tipping point. We've seemed to have been there for like the last 20 years, really. What's ever going to be the point at which, if we agree what we've just said is true, that the muddy water people just go away and then the positivity fully flows in? What can change things? If you have any thoughts on that.
Oof, I don't know. I think we're almost at the point where it's too little, too late. I think if everyone woke up, if everyone developed their psychic abilities to the point where we could intuitively tell when people are telling the truth or not. This is one of the ET agendas, by the way. They will wake you up psychically. They're trying very hard to get people to wake up. And if we could do that, well, lies and corruption would become a thing of the past. I'm not sure I see that happening. I mean, if the entire population were to just lay down their arms and say enough is enough, I think that would be a huge step forward.
Okay, so we've touched on the alien abduction scenario. Can you give us a rundown of what you would probably find to be your top ever cases?
Oh gosh, some of my top cases. That's a very difficult question because I think honestly the best evidence we have is the huge number of cases with remarkable similarities. But yeah, I've absolutely gotten some really great cases. I think one that really impresses me is a whole conglomeration. It was a wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon. And this was some time ago, 1992 to 94. And this was my hometown where I grew up. So when the police started receiving a bunch of calls, and so did the local newspaper, they contacted me because I had written an article for the local newspaper about sightings in the area. Okay. And they said, we just received a bunch of calls. I've got a police tape from people who called the police. Something is going on. There was a wave of sightings on June 14th, 1992. So having grown up there, I knew a lot of people in the area, and I started calling everyone. And I found a bunch of witnesses to that one night involving cars being chased down the road, UFOs landing, people being taken on board, large numbers of craft in the sky. And, to date, I've interviewed like 30, just for that one night. And mind you, this is a wave of sightings that went on for 2 years. But on that one night, I found about 30 different adult witnesses situated in various locations throughout Topanga Canyon, which is a pretty small area overall. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not huge. This is right outside of Los Angeles, California. And they all saw stuff on that one night. So it was incredible corroboration. I ended up calling the police, giving them my number, and they referred a lot of cases to me. And this was a wave of sightings that went on for years. And I honestly still get cases from that area. It's a huge hot spot. That was one of my favorite cases, for sure.
So within that case itself, say you had X amount of witnesses, was it ever narrowed down to, and this is the reason, i.e. this one person was abducted, or were they all abducted?
No, I couldn't really pin down, one particular reason. And some people just had simple sightings. Others, yeah, they were taken on board. There was a lady who was pregnant at the time she was taken on board, and she had a very unusual pregnancy. And I think that was probably why. I think she's a contactee, honestly, because she's had a lot of these kinds of experiences. and they had this UFO landing outside their house, and she remembered being taken on board. But her pregnancy, she was pregnant with twins and had lost one of them. And the doctors told her, your chances of carrying this to full term are about 1 in, I think, 6 million, they said. And that's when she started being taken on board. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think probably one of the reasons why. Because
do we know that ended well for her?
Yeah, I met the child. He's amazing. Okay. Super precocious, very psychic, which is a pattern absolutely that turns up. But started talking about his missing twin. Said he was seeing him at night, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
But yeah, there's many different reasons, I think, why people are being taken on board. I think people like to simplify this phenomena, but there's levels and levels. As you know, there's rabbit holes you can go down, and there's many different agendas. I'm not sure I really like that word. It's got a negative connotation, but
I know what you mean, though. Ultimate end goal, should we say, or something like that, or a route of direction for the human race. You touched on there. I know I've just sidetracked the conversation from the top 3 alien abduction cases, but you said it seems to be going in a psychic direction. Is that part of this whole raising the whole consciousness of humanity to be better again?
100%. Yeah. Because what's really interesting is this is a phenomenon that does go back hundreds, well, thousands of years. We know this from documents and ancient writings.
Cave paintings and all sorts, isn't it?
Right. I mean, you name it. Hieroglyphics, medieval wood carvings. This goes back a long time. The Romans called them flying shields. But things changed dramatically around 1947, 48. When there was sort of a super wave of sightings. This is when Kenneth Arnold had his sighting over Mount Rainier. This is when the Roswell crash. There was a wave of sightings across the world that was unprecedented. There's been waves before, but this was a big one, and it never really ended. Because from that point on, people were reporting UFOs in, the numbers of sightings just went off the charts. And this is when people started reporting in much larger numbers than certainly before this, being taken on board. So what is going on? I think what happened is we had started the atomic age. We had reached a point where we had the ability to destroy all life on this planet. We were well on our way down the wrong road. And this is when ETs are like, okay, we have to take care of the kids. They've gotten hold of the matches. We need to conduct a campaign to wake them up. And I say this because this is what the cases show. When someone's taken on board and they get a message of any kind beyond don't be afraid, it's almost always a warning against nuclear proliferation. Number one, that comes up all the time, but against our warlike ways, against greed and corruption. They talk about the destruction of the environment, polluting the waters and chopping down the forests and polluting the air, our use of fossil fuels. This sort of thing comes up over and over and over and over and over again. People are actually shown images of, disasters and future things that could happen due to the way we're destroying our environment and each other. So this is another reason why I think, okay, let's take a look at this and see what's happening. Is this bad if they're trying to help us? That is absolutely one of their main goals, is to wake us up. And, beyond that, real quick, if I may, there's a spiritual aspect to this that's not covered by a lot of major researchers who are very much nuts and bolts people and wanting to prove this and don't want to bring up the fact that these people who are having contact come away from it with, they believe, the ability to heal or do astral projection or psychic reading, mediumship, physical levitation. I ended up writing a book on levitation because people are reporting this, physically levitating.
That's a weird one, that one, Preston, because a lot of the time, right, and I don't consider myself psychic in any way, shape or form, really. However, I always have dreams of myself being able to levitate.
Yep. Me too, actually.
It's weird, isn't it? I wonder if that's somehow part of this whole shenanigans.
I think so. I came to this field as a skeptic and sort of entered it as a researcher, but I started to see UFOs and I started to explore the paranormal as well. And I'm the kind of guy who's like, well, if they're experiencing it, I want to experience it. So I was out there in the fields looking for UFOs. When I started investigating ghosts, I'm like, let's go to the haunted houses. And I did. I experienced ghosts. And when I heard about out-of-body experiences, I'm like, well, apparently this is something anyone can do. So I learned how to do that. And I started having a lot of psychic experiences because I wanted to know if it's real. I wanted to not just read about it. I want to know.
I'm like you. I also want to know. So that search full of the answers, it's really what drives me.
Absolutely a connection between all of this.
Because
so many contactees, pretty much across the board, it's the rule rather than the exception, are profoundly psychic. And this points towards the ET agenda again. And it's very positive. They're trying so hard to wake people up and put us on the right path.
Okay, now with that in mind, because I did want to circle back to this, you said a lot, and it was always reported that a lot of abductees are shown the images of destruction, and you've got to look after your planet, you've got to look after this, that, and the other. Do we have stories of, we probably won't, but why aren't the entities abducting the people with the greed, power, control, and going directly to them and saying, look, you've got to look after your planet, and there be effective change at that source? Because you can tell as many people right down at the bottom of the river as you want, but they can't all swim upriver.
Yeah.
So do we have anything there?
100%. I looked into it. I'm like, have any world leaders ever had an experience? And of course they have. And there's a lot of them. Here in the US, I looked into it. And of course, President Reagan had sightings as a governor. And there's talk from some of his friends that he had face-to-face encounter. Jimmy Carter, of course, saw a UFO.
Yes,
many governors, Fife Symington, Hayden Burns, and go down the list of senators, representatives, governors, all who have had sightings. As far as direct contact, I don't know, but there's certainly a lot of talk in the UFO community about, say, President Eisenhower meeting ETs at Edwards Air Force Base in 1954, which, if you believe the reporting on this, and I think it's quite compelling, did have an interaction with ETs in which they were talking about, ending the nuclear program, which we didn't want to do. They wanted, our governments wanted the technology, and the ETs were not about to hand it over to a government that's so corrupt and abusive, and said, you need to conduct, a disclosure campaign, which we didn't want to do. I think I think lots of government leaders. We know this President of Brazil, President of Mexico, several countries. There was a guy in Russia who was a leader of, I forget the province, but
it's okay.
He had absolutely full-on onboard experiences, and basically was told the same message. So my point is, yes, our government leaders have had encounters, but they are not behaving. They're dug in to what the greed and the power and the money and control. And this is why I think we're having a grassroots campaign. This is why I think UFOs are showing up over drive-in movie theaters. As I wrote about in one of my books, I've got 100 cases where UFOs are hovering over drive-in movie theaters and showing themselves in a clearly obvious display. I wrote another book called Schoolyard UFO Encounters, which I love because the evidence of that is undeniable. There are photographs, there are landing traces, there are physiological effects, animal reactions, electromagnetic evidence, angel hair, which we haven't even discussed, but that's a substance that comes out of UFOs. The evidence for that is outstanding, and it's all over the world. Westall High School in Australia, Broadhaven Primary School in Wales, Crestview Elementary School in Florida, of course the Rua Zimbabwe case, Ariel Elementary School, and these are just the ones we know about. Hillsdale College, that are famous. But I've got cases in England, Russia, Canada, China, across the US, South America, Africa, Australia, you name it. This is happening. This is a clear, obvious publicity campaign to announce their presence.
So you think because they tried the high end and failed, they're coming in from the bottom now, and then that will work itself up via mass.
Just like the civil rights movement, which was absolutely resisted by all the highest levels of government. But it was an idea whose time had come, and it changed the world. And I think that's what we're going to see. At some point, this is going to come out.
Yeah. Back to the abductions scenario. Something's always been in my head, which is: has anyone ever reported seeing an animal on board at the same time?
They certainly have. Absolutely.
Ooh. Can you give me a case of that?
I wrote a series of books called Not From Here, which is about articles I've written, but they cover the weirder, more unusual aspects. And I tackled that.
Oh, cool.
Because there was a case from John Mack where a lady was taken on board and she saw pine forests and there were birds and it was a whole arboretum. And I started going through the cases, and there's quite a few of them where people have seen. Betty Andreasen talked about this. There was another lady, Katarina Wilson, who was taken on board, and she saw a variety of animals, some of who were from Earth, some who weren't. Dolly Saffron talked about that. She's like, oh yeah, she is fully conscious, but she's part of working with them. And they come down and will scoop up animals who are in danger of extinction and put them into animal husbandry centers. And this includes not only Earth animals, but animals that are not from Earth. So,
again, to what end with that? Is that again to repopulate the Earth at some stage, or just keep it like a zoo? Do you have any thoughts?
I don't have
any thoughts.
Yeah, it does not appear that they're doing what we do, which is putting animals in cages for display. It's about preservation. As near as I can tell, this is what the cases point towards. This is why there's so much room for research in this field. Because here I am, I'm just one guy with a very limited budget and doing my best to fight this government cover-up. There's an army of researchers out there doing this, but it's like hitting a brick wall. This should be well-funded. This should be open and transparent, but it's not. So it's very hard to move this field forward. Absolutely, I think the evidence is there that this is what they're doing, because they're collecting plants of all kinds. We see this over and over again. There was a case in France with Maurice Mass, a lavender farmer, where he noticed someone was stealing his lavender flowers. Now, he makes a living doing this, so it was quite upsetting.
Yeah.
And he caught the culprit. It was a UFO, these little guys. He ran at them. They paralyzed him with a little beam of light. But it's a very well-known case of many, many, many where ETs are seen picking flowers and plants and trees and the whole deal.
So it literally is. It literally is the story of ET, then, the film.
Yeah, it very much is. I think my favorite of all those films is probably Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which really only skimmed the surface of how deep this phenomena goes. That was really just about sightings in a government meeting. I'm still waiting for the ultimate movie about direct ET contact. I think the UFO incident by Betty and Barney Hill with James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons was one of the best movies made on this subject. It was very low budget, but boy was it good, and they followed the story, which I love.
I know the film, I haven't seen it, but
it's worth watching.
Yeah, I will look it up and actually do that. I mean, the one that is always pushed or everyone knows about is the Fire in the Sky one, isn't it? But we know that wasn't the true representation of his experience. Yeah,
such a good movie until they ruined it with the onboard segment.
Yeah, with the weird brown guys.
Set the whole field back 10, 20 years. I can't tell you how many people came up to me like, oh, this is terrible. Is that what happens when you're pulled on board? I'm like, no, that's complete fiction. That's not at all what happened to him.
Yeah, strange. I wish they hadn't done that. But hey-ho. Alien bases.
Yes. Yeah.
I know that's a huge. What
Is
do you
that a
think?
question?
You kind of, yeah. Thoughts on that? Cases? Just go. I know you've got a lot of info on that one.
Yeah, certainly. There's a smattering of cases that really speak towards that, where people are taken to, they believe, an underground base. Now, it's hard to say for sure because it's rare that a person, sees the whole experience from beginning to end and knows exactly where they're going. And some of them may perceive that they're perhaps underground, and perhaps they're not. But yeah, there's certainly a number of cases like that. I just read about one in Puerto Rico where a guy was certain that this craft went into the mountain there in Puerto Rico, and they had a little enclave in there. I think there are a number of cases like this. I'm not so sure these are necessarily permanent, but these ETs do have the technology to go in and out of the water very quickly. So there's lots of cases of USOs off the Southern California coast. And I speculated about the possibility of a base there. I can't prove it. If not, there's a parking lot down there. I know there's a lot of USOs. And I think in some cases there are or were bases. I'm not sure how many, but I do think that, yes, there's some on the moon. I don't think they're necessarily active. But I looked into that because I had a number of contactees telling me, oh, they took me up there and showed me stuff. And when Dolly Saffron told me that, I'm like, here we go again. She had that exact experience. I'm like, wow.
I'll go into the moon.
Yep. This is not at all uncommon. This happened to a Navy medic, Kevin Kamen. He was taken from his Navy ship onto a craft with praying mantis beings. And they went to the moon. He's looking down at he didn't think it was the moon at first. He thought maybe it was some bombing range because he saw all these craters. Until they came up over the rise, and looking through the porthole, he saw the Earth off in the distance. He says he nearly crapped his pants at that point. I mean, it just shook him up bad. And it's not unusual. This absolutely happened over and over again. They do this to people on purpose, intentionally. It's
to wow them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to let them truly know this is happening. More often, I think people will look down at the Earth and see it far below. That happens very regularly. Occasionally to the moon, and in a few cases to other planets within our solar system, and more rarely to absolutely other planets beyond our solar system.
And so as a scenario, alien bases, is it just a simple scenario of them being just somewhere local to go to do whatever agenda they have? Because they don't have the space on their ship or whatever to do whatever they need to do? Is that why they're there?
Yeah, I think it's a matter perhaps of convenience. With that kind of advanced technology, this is something they can do easily. And I think it's a way to sort of avoid prying eyes and interference from perhaps government sources who are trying so hard to track all of this and control it. If you go back to the AARO, that I mentioned, ARROW, this new government group, has 6 goals in mind. And the first 3 are basically tracking and surveilling and determining the kind of technology that UFOs are. But the last 3 raised my eyebrows because they are to mitigate the phenomena. Good luck with that. Mitigate, I don't know how you even plan to, we can't take down these craft. They're so far in advance of us. They can fly circles around our actual missiles. They know far before we even launch them because they can read your mind. This is how advanced they are. But also to govern the phenomena and to obtain their technology. So this is a bit
arrogant, this, isn't it?
Yeah. And so these ETs can go underwater or into these bases. And there is some evidence of bases, but the reporting on this is still a bit sketchy, so I don't know for sure.
Yeah, because I've heard those reports, or at least seen them on TV shows, where they say there's an underground base and there's been armies sent in and there was, firefights and stuff.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thumbs down.
You reckon, yeah? But certainly based on all the stuff we talked about earlier with the healing agenda and positivity, that one does go against it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's kind of how I think an important facet of research is. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is anecdotal, but when someone tells a story that is a complete outlier, that absolutely goes against everything we've ever heard in every other case, I have to put it on the back burner because who knows? Maybe more evidence will come along to prove it. But more often than not, these turn out to be very carefully laid out disinformation. Because if you track some of the stories of like the Galactic Federation, or which I don't think exists, I'm not getting any reports of this, or ETs and humans having fights, it's coming from sources that I simply do not trust. Intelligence officers, people who are making claims that are not legit. I mean, there's some real bad actors in this field. They're on my naughty list. I'm not going to name them because they're still active, but some I will name, and that's Donald Menzel. He was
I've heard the name, yeah.
Astronomer, I believe. I forget what university he was from. I was going to say Harvard, but I don't know if that's true. But at any rate, he knew UFOs were real. The research from Stanton Friedman pretty much proved that he was the paid agent. And he was debunking case after case after case. And he knew this was a real phenomenon. Philip Klass, he's also passed away. I don't trust him at all. Class dismissed. An article I saw that made me laugh because I don't trust him.
I didn't either.
Yeah, there are some very popular, quote, contactees and researchers who get paid a bundle to speak at conventions. And I just give them the kind of side eye because I don't trust their research or their experiences. I really don't. Like the Mars and 20 and back, and I was a super soldier on Mars.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Which, God bless them. People believe they experienced this, and perhaps they are having my lab experiences. I don't know. I don't have personal cases of it, but I can tell you basic science tells us we cannot live on Mars. There's no magnetic field. You won't survive. I'm sorry. It's impossible. You can't do it. So this cannot be true. Basics, elementary science.
On that basis of Mars, it just sparked a thought in my mind. Do you think we did come from Mars at some stage when there was a magnetic field, when there was an atmosphere?
Yeah, well, that's what the ETs told Dolly Safran.
Cool.
So I thought that was really interesting because there's certainly a lot of speculation about it and very circumstantial evidence. This does come up in contactee accounts. And I think it's really interesting because when you think about the fact that some of these ETs do look just like us, and our studying of the theory of evolution and human origins is, again, sketchy at best. We really don't know where we fully came from. And the fact that some of these guys look like us and are coming from elsewhere, I think definitely points to that probability.
Yeah, I always think that as well. Now, we just touched on the species aspect there. Alien species, and I wrote down people who say they know these exist and they know their intentions and thoughts and stuff. Like they'll say the praying mantis people, they 100% do exist and I know what they want. That always drives skepticism in me. You will have had cases and people reporting that stuff to you. What evidence is there to say, right, yes, we think based on 100 reports you've had, 2,000 at MUFON I've had in general, that the praying mantis exist, the tall whites exist, or whatever species. What ones do we think are real, and which ones do you would find a bit dodgy?
Well, I mentioned this before. We have a database that is not just 100 cases or even 1,000. We're talking hundreds of thousands of cases.
Oh, wow.
So you can't ignore this and be scientifically objective. And I think there's a consensus of all these cases. You can filter out all the outliers. This is something statisticians and scientists do, because science is based on initially anecdotal observational science. And if you can collect enough cases from widely divergent sources who don't know each other and have no resource to pull out this information, you can say this is true. And we have that. We have enough cases that are absolutely identical in detail to people describing grays and what's on board a craft, what to expect. Now, I've interviewed so many people, I can pretty much predict 80 to 90% of what they're going to say. And these are people who do know because they've had the experience. There's a big gap between belief and knowledge.
Yes.
You can only know what you've personally experienced. I know UFOs are real. I have seen them. I've seen them more than once. I know it's real personally. Can I prove that? Not even with a photograph or a video or a landing trace. Am I going to be able to prove this to anybody? That's evidence. I think it's enough to pass judgment in a court of law to say that this is 100% real. I mean, we have implant removal evidence. We have medical evidence that cannot be explained in any other way. These landing traces show that the ground was heated to like 3,000 degrees. How did that happen? You know, we have the evidence. I would point to the Turkey footage of 2007, 8, and 9, which showed these structured craft with little humanoids in it. No one has been able to debunk that or explain that as anything other than a craft. And it's certainly not a plane.
No, it's a good bit of footage, that, isn't it? I've watched it. It's very good.
Yeah, we have the evidence. It's there. What we have to do is step back and look at, to me, it's surprising that we have opinions about facts. Facts are facts. There should not be an opinion about it. And we're all trying to decide, what does this evidence mean? When I think the evidence speaks for itself. When you have these craft landing and they've got little windows and they're showing up on radar and they're photographing and people are missing from their homes and little ETs are walking around, we know what this is. If the crash retrieval reports are true, which are purely anecdotal, unfortunately, because we don't have access to the craft, they're not in the public arena. But our governments or secret governments have them. They know absolutely 100% what this is. And if we could get our hands on that, well, all bets are off. We know what this is. The evidence disclosure has, in effect, happened. Everyone on this planet knows what a UFO is, pretty much.
No, very much so. So, species, though, I would 100% say that greys, yeah, because it's just so common, and that's what everyone reports. Praying mantis one.
Yep.
A lot of people report that, so I would err on the side of, yes, okay, cool, I believe it. And as a side note, isn't it weird that there is a huge praying mantis and we have one on Earth? Is there a link there? What's that?
Yeah, I've thought about that many times because insects are such a wide, there's how many insects do we have on this planet? More than humans. And we don't have giant bumblebee ETs walking around or giant
ladybug we know of.
I've never heard it. I find that curious, but it is what it is. It's not a phrase I really like because it's just stating the obvious, but the fact is we're stuck with these reports. Yes, that is what people are seeing, and there are a lot of them. And why that is, I couldn't tell you, other than this is what people are seeing. So what we have
there's been no link from anyone who's reported seeing a big praying mantis that then mentioned to that alien being, oh, we've got one of you on Earth. What's that about?
Yeah, no, that would be a great thing to dig deep on. Because I wonder about it. I've wondered about that many times. Because, we do see all these humanoids, for one thing. They're all almost always humanoid. Bipedal, arms, legs, a head, eyes, so forth. They have anywhere from 3 to 6 fingers. Never really varies beyond that. They're all humanoid. And this is the message that people get, that we share a common heritage, that we all have genetics, that we're all basically human. This is certainly what the Greys have told people over and over and over again. And when Dolly Saffron told me that, I'm like, yeah, I've heard this before.
We're all human.
Yeah, it just dials out different.
Yeah.
We all have the same basic genetics, which is true. Talk to any geneticist and they will tell you that a stalk of celery And a giraffe, a peacock, and a human share most of the genetics is identical. I mean, there's differences for sure, but it's mostly in how it dials out. We don't understand genetics to the point where we can understand why people with such similar genetics look so different. I mean, we know that chimpanzees and humans are 99% absolutely the same, and yet they're very different looking. But we have grays, we have praying mantis, we have human looking, we have tall whites, little blue beings, really strange humanoids of all kinds. Some will be really short and hairy. Others are, I have two praying mantis accounts of 15 feet tall. Those are a little bit of outliers because normally they're 6 to 8 or 9 feet. But so I think what we're looking at is it's not accurate really to call them different species because we don't know this. And people are saying, oh, there's 50 different species. I'm like, well, they're all humanoids. This is why this field is so hard to grapple with because we don't have any baseline. We don't have the ET bodies to say this is what the genetic genome is for this. People say, oh, we have different races here on Earth. No, we're all one race. We have different ancestries.
Correct.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah, very much so.
If you look at the variation here on Earth, from the little tiny pygmies to the very tall, what are they, Watusis, and all the different skin tones, you could probably stick a few grays and tall whites in there, and no one would even notice.
Yeah, that's true. The human race is an odd thing when you think about the diversity of how we look. Right, now obviously we were talking about different species and stuff there, and the four you mentioned, the greys, tall and small, human-looking ones, tall whites, praying mantises, and the blue ones. That's exactly my initial thoughts. Have you seen that Star Trek episode, Star Trek Next Generation, where they explain this phenomenon of common ancestry and how the Klingons look like the Romulans and blah, blah, blah?
Oh, probably. I'm a huge Trekkie. I can't recall it specifically, but...
Yes. It literally gives the answer to this very thing, and the reason why people are what they are is because literally they all shared a common ancestry at some stage, and you believe that ultimately would have been a human.
Yeah, well, I think that's what the cases are showing us. And it's funny you mentioned Star Trek, because when I was not in this field, and I did hear reports of humanoids, I thought, this is too Star Trek-y. This is like just people putting on makeup and looking very similar to humans. But it's absolutely accurate. This is what people are reporting. And Star Trek got a lot of stuff right. I thought it was really interesting with the handheld instruments that can open up wounds and zip them right back up. We see that on board UFOs all the time.
Well, there were stories, weren't there, of Gene Roddenberry supposedly being abducted or at least introduced to the UFO things, and that's where he apparently got all his ideas from for Star Trek.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've never heard that, I don't believe he spoke about it publicly in any way, but I think contact occurs in many different ways. It's much more widespread than people realize. I heard a quote from J. Allen Hynek, who, if you don't know him, he's astronomical consultant for Blue Book, and kind of defected because he realized Blue Book's was lying, basically, and covering up the best evidence. Now, he said 1 in 40 people have had an onboard encounter. And I thought, no way. That's far too common. I would know somebody, because we all know 40 people. And this is what I always challenge skeptics. I dare you, I challenge you to ask your family, your friends, your coworkers. Ask 40 people, and you'll get a first-hand story from someone you love and trust. And later, it was the Roper organization, which does polling on an official basis, found 1 in 50 people show the markers of being a contactee. So my point is, this is widespread, and contact can come in many different ways. Yeah, some people are pulled on board and have direct face-to-face contact. Others will have a simple sighting and telepathic contact. Some will, I think, have dreams or perhaps be inspired, get what they call a download, which is kind of an interesting new term, but I think points towards there being telepathic communication. Some people perhaps are inspired It's very interesting
Yeah.
to me that science fiction kind of came right on the same time as the whole UFO wave.
That's true. It's, if you extrapolate that out, those figures, 1 in 40, 1 in 50, that ultimately means, as you know, that hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, in theory, have had contact experience.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, 1 in 50, okay. And we all know about, everyone's got a circle of family, friends, and coworkers, which is about that number people were basically close to. So that's, I think, very clever on the part of the ETs. All we need to do is contact 1 in 50, and this way everyone on this planet is going to know, because that one person is going to tell their closest loved ones, which certainly wasn't true at first. I will say that most people I've interviewed often told me, I haven't told my family this. I keep this secret. That's changed quite a bit. But yeah, I think it's been a very effective publicity campaign on the part of the ETs.
And what do you think time frame is for it? Because if we just, I know we've got cases in theory going back hundreds of years re-abduction, but let's just assume it started in 47 with the Kenneth Arnold sighting, right? Going forward to now, we've got 70, 80, 90 years or whatever it is of these experiences. How long can it go? Or do you think it's just to that point where the evil ones rod off and then everyone is decent?
I wish I knew. I hate to speculate in this field, but you can't help it. I do think disclosure is inevitable, just because the truth has a way of taking care of itself. I think that eventually the cover-up is going to collapse under its own weight of lies and deception. It's already collapsing. How many whistleblowers do we need to unscrew a screwed up government? It's at that point, I feel like the 100th monkey has come out and started yapping. I don't know if our governments will ever come clean. They're still lying now, blatantly, in Congress, under oath, said that we have never shot at these things.
We know that's not true. Yeah.
We know nothing about Malmstrom. I'm like, really? You're the heads of the Defense Department and you don't know anything about Malmstrom, which, where UFOs came down and shut down missiles. Anyone in this field knows about that case because it's one of many. They're lying. They're still lying. They've lied from day one to the present. So I don't see any reason why they would stop lying unless it's to their benefit.
Monetarily. Yeah.
That's why we're seeing disclosure, because it's to their benefit. They are becoming irrelevant. They're becoming not credible. They're losing control of the narrative. They've got a plan on how to roll this out, and that's what they're doing. I don't trust them, but I think it will happen because
it's inevitable, isn't it? Truth is inevitable, I think.
And also, I think at some point we're going to have open official contact. ETs haven't done it, I think, for obvious reasons. We're not quite ready. We're still a very fear-based society. We still are electing leaders who don't have our best interests in mind. It's our own fault. We've made our own bed. It's up to us to fix our own problems. The ETs have said this in so many words over and over and over again. I would love it if they came down and said, enough is enough. These guys got to go. Yeah. But they're not going to do that. I don't see any signs of them doing that.
No, there is none. Otherwise, they would have given us clean technology straight away and we'd have fixed everything, wouldn't we? Let's play this out then, right? Let's just assume, we'll just set a fixed date in the future, 20 years, there is disclosure. Do you think right at that point, alien abductions end?
Well, first of all, I would disagree with the term alien abduction.
Okay.
Because certainly a lot of people who are having this experience will call it that, but most don't. They will call it contact. Okay. Because they feel it's, friendly. And no, I don't think it will ever end. I think it will be called interaction. I think it will be called visiting. I think it will be called, let's take a trip. Let's go over, build a community and start having open official contact, going on board.
But it won't be surreptitious, is what I was getting at. Like, it won't be like hidden. It will be like, oh, do you know my Uncle Bob? Yeah, he's visited by these guys all the time. We can see it. Oh, he's off on his adventure. It would be that sort of thing, rather than, oh, they took me in the middle of the night.
Yeah. I would think so. I hope so. I can't say. That's such a hard thing to say.
Oh, of course, it's a hard one to answer, but I'm just thinking your thoughts on it.
I remember when I got involved in this field, there was, people who had been in this field for decades. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a latecomer. And I've been in it for over 35 years now. But back then they were saying disclosure is going to happen. It's going to happen next year. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I can't wait. Of course, it didn't. It never, and it still hasn't. And it's always been rumored to be right around the corner. So I've become a little jaded about it. And I hate to say it, but yeah, I just don't think our governments are going to do this voluntarily. I think they're dragging their feet. They're kicking and screaming. They're doing everything they can to remain in control. But governments come and go. Countries rise and fall. So we'll see. Perhaps something will happen that's so, absolutely changes everything, changes the paradigm. And then we will have open official contact, and people are like, yeah, you want to go on board? You guys from Orion are landing. Let's go.
And we want to see it in our lifetime, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I would point people to my book, Symmetry, and I'm not trying to toot the horn or sell the book, but Dolly Saffron has a lot of information about what the ETs have told her, and that we're dealing with in our future, which is what a lot of contactees have been told as well. But she lays it out in black and white, really connects a lot of the dots and fills the blanks, where I think it's somewhat lacking in this field. But she's talking about
that out.
Yeah, she's talking about how the magnetic fields of our planet are collapsing. Look this up. There's good science being reported on this, and that ETs aren't even here right now because our magnetic fields are too volatile, and that we are looking at a possible CME, coronal mass ejection. And look into the science of this, because it is ramping up. Our sun is very volatile, which will basically knock out the entire world grid in a way that's irreparable and irreparable. And at some point, we will have open official contact, because the sun will micronova, which is something that mainstream science has been trying to cover up, but has recently been coming out, that this does in fact happen, that stars go through cycles. And there's evidence of this that is being covered up on our planet, that our sun does go through regular cycles of this. So yeah, the ETs will come down en masse, and this will be within our lifetimes, and scoop people up.
Do we think the magnetic scenario is what causes the crashes?
Yes, precisely. Because people always ask me, like, if they're so darn advanced, how come they crash? And I've always got a couple of reasons for that. One is, well, they're flying around a lot more up there than you realize. 2, nobody's perfect. Accidents happen. And 3, Dolly absolutely confirmed this for me. That's why I so much loved speaking with her, because I had a lot of questions, but everything she said, I've heard before, but it was very piecemeal, through the lens of fear, incomplete. Our magnetic fields are, writhing and whirling, and ETs use this. People have been told this over and over again, that they basically are harnessing our magnetic fields, our gravitational field lines, and using these to go. This is why you see UFOs kind of rocking and darting and turning and moving in very strange ways.
Because it's in flux, so they're following it like a road, so to speak.
Yeah. It's like floating on a wave. This is how you can tell perhaps a government reverse engineered craft from a true ET. Because a lot of what's flying around now, all really, are reverse engineered government craft.
Interesting. So, I like the idea of this. I know the cycle thing with the sun, and I didn't know to the extent that the magnetic field is shifting, but it's the same with the Earth, isn't it? Everything's cyclical, weather patterns and everything.
I would really encourage people not to believe me. Look it up yourself. People really need to go back to basic science, because there's so much. This is the information age, but it's turned into the disinformation age.
Yeah. We're in the age now, are we not, Preston, where we're told, don't go researching for yourself. You see that on TV programs, don't go researching for yourself.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
Isn't it? But very much so.
You'll never learn. We have to leave belief behind and just work from basic knowledge.
Exactly. Now, you've mentioned about the flying on the magnetic fields. Do you think then that is what the answer is to the 33rd parallel and the hotspots?
Yeah, I do. Because I've looked into that. I'm like, well, I'm not so sure this is accurate, because you can point to any darn location on this planet and dig up a long, rich, varied history of UFO encounters anywhere. But there is a pattern there. And if you start to look in areas that are major hotspots, people talk about, oh, there's a vortex in Sedona, or this area has San Luis Valley has an enormous amount of contact. That's in Colorado. And I haven't done the research on this in terms of digging into the science of it, but I suspect that this is where the magnetic field lines are more stable. And we see this with ley lines and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of activity. Yeah, I suspect that there are some real answers there as to why there are certain areas on this planet that have more activity than others.
Well, maybe there's a future book in that for you.
Very possibly.
Good stuff. Let's move slightly adjacent to the UFO phenomenon, which is ghosts and death. Now, I'm sure you've heard the story from Whitley Strieber where he says his wife Anne had said, it's something to do with what we call death, the UFO phenomenon. It has something to do with that. Do you think they're intertwined?
To a degree. And I want to be very careful when I talk about this, because there are researchers out there who kind of lump the whole UFO, ghosts, Bigfoot, near-death experiences, all of it into one sort of mechanism that is wearing different masks, and that this isn't ET at all. I'm like, well, hold on, let's put the brakes on this right now, because where's the evidence for that? And their basic, strongest argument is that UFO encounters are sometimes really bizarre and have just kind of high strangeness elements to them that make them question whether this is even ET. And I'm like, that is not a sufficient reason to say that, this isn't ET. A lot of stuff gets put under the UFO umbrella that doesn't belong there. We know we are physical beings on a planet. It's absolutely logical that there are others out there. And yeah, I do think it's connected to the paranormal. When someone's taken on board, it is very much, in many ways, like a near-death experience in terms of being pulled up a tunnel of light, and just some of its basic elements. There are weird commonalities, but a UFO onboard experience is exactly, I think, based on the evidence, exactly what it appears to be. And same true for a near-death experience. Now, there are people who have had near-death experiences who report seeing ETs on the other side. Okay. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that, that these are the same phenomena. I think Bigfoot is a Bigfoot. I've done research into Bigfoot. They've been around hundreds upon hundreds of years on this planet. And ghosts, absolutely, evidence for that goes back thousands of years. It's in every darn culture on this planet. I think the evidence for ghosts and spirits is conclusive. There's no doubt that that's real. I would hesitate to say that these are all inextricably connected. I think they've got remarkable commonalities. I think what often happens is a person who's a contactee, say, will have their psychic abilities woken up, and they will this triggers them to have a lot of paranormal events. Yeah. Or a person might have a near-death experience, and then they become profoundly psychic, and this can draw in ET contact because they can hear them now. Because a near-death experience is profoundly dissociative. And if you look into the history of psychic phenomena, it's connected to dissociation. And so I think what we're looking at is weird bleed-throughs and commonalities, but these are, in their essence, separate phenomena.
Yeah, I also think the very same thing. Now, do you think humanity, in our default state, actually is psychic, but we are turned off at the moment? And that's why we are being woken up.
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. This psychic abilities is not paranormal. It's not supernatural. If you talk to people, almost every single person has at least one report of, oh gosh, I knew you were going to call, or I dreamt about that before it happened, or I think I had an out-of-body experience, or something. And some people develop it through meditation, and they have a lot of it. And certainly it does seem in some cases to run in families. So there might be a genetic propensity towards it.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely develop psychic abilities through meditative practices. We've seen this over and over again. I've taught people how to have astral projection who have never done it, because I learned from a book. And I was able to do it. I'm like, oh my gosh, it works.
Lucky you, because I tried and it didn't work for me.
I can give you some pointers for sure.
Yeah, if you can. I tried for about a month or two, and I was getting nowhere.
Yeah, well, it can be a steep learning curve, and it does take an enormous amount of effort. And I think applied correctly, it's a lot easier because there are exercises that are very specific.
Oh, cool. Yeah. We'll talk about that after then, if you don't mind, just so you can give me some pointers on that one. So that's cool if we think we really are a psychic being just locked up within ourselves.
Yeah, and it's been very intentional, I think, because look at what our governments have done, putting fluoride in the water. There's some science on this, that this calcifies our pineal gland.
Pineal gland, that's right. I was going to say the same thing.
And it's not good. Don't drink fluoridated water. Other countries don't. And look at the whole drug wars. Illegal drugs are, quote, illegal. But if you look into the history of it, it's being fed into our country, and it's sanctioned. It really is. And it's not just illegal drugs, it's legal drugs. Now more people are dying of overdoses of legal drugs than not legal. We are absolutely a drugged up culture. It's horrendous. So this is what we're dealing with, is people, elements within our society who we all know who they are. The cabal, call them what you want, Illuminati, the one percenters, military industrial complex, call them what you want. We know they're there. I think they're responsible for this, and they're doing their best to dumb us down, with the fear-based media and focusing on murder and gossip and divisiveness and politics, when really people on earth are good people, and given the chance, without eating all this poisonous food. Go to the grocery store and look at the ingredients. It's no wonder there's so many diseases.
Completely agree with you. Yeah, very much so. Strange things. What strange things have ever happened to you? Now, it doesn't have to be a UFO. It could be a ghost. It could just be a random interaction with a person. What do you think is the weirdest thing that's happened to you?
I've had a lot.
Really?
I have, because I got really into it. And like I said, I want to experience all of this. As a very young boy, age 9, I did have a really interesting psychic episode, which I didn't even categorize as that because I didn't know. Okay. But I was watching a game show with my sister called Treasure Hunt. And I knew who was going to be picked from the audience. I just knew it. And I knew which canister had the flowers in it. And I knew which box, and there was like 70 boxes on stage, had the check in it. I had this weird psychic thing going on for that entire game show. And we just laughed and rolled on the floor. I thought it was the funniest thing.
Well, because you were saying to your sister, it's this one. It's going to be picked. Oh, wow.
And she's looking at me like, how do you know? I'm like, I have no idea. And that was the first. But yeah, I ended up seeing my mother's ghost, a full color apparition after she died. I've had a lot of out-of-body experiences where I've been to the other side and went to the Akashic Library, looked at my past lives, met an enlightened master a couple of times, went to a healing temple, schools of learning. I mean, don't get me talking on out-of-body experiences. I will talk for 2 hours.
Maybe I'll have to have you on back again in the future to discuss that topic, because I am so enthralled by that one as well. But going back to your mother, the ghost, how close was it to her passing away, and what was that experience like?
It was months after she passed away. I was at the service for her. It was absolutely devastating because I didn't believe in life after death. But the whole family was there, and my father was driving up in the car, and I saw her sitting next to him and drove right up next to me. Mind you, I've got people on both sides, and I can see her perfectly. And she had a very, erect way of sitting. Her posture was perfect. She was very careful about her posture.
Okay.
She was a very graceful woman. And I'm looking at her going, oh my God, what? And I'm like, oh, my eyes. Because I didn't believe in ghosts. And I didn't even then. I thought, well, I've lost my mind. I'm certainly not going to tell anyone this. And I didn't. I kept it secret until I realized ghosts were real. I thought, oh, wow. I saw
real. Yeah, so was this after you had the epiphany regarding UFOs?
No, this was before. Well, it was kind of right before. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I wondered if you'd have then had that, if it was the other way round, you'd have thought, well, I was wrong about that. So
what is interesting is, I started investigating UFOs in '86, and that was the time I had picked up Robert Monroe's books about out-of-body experiences. And I started having all kinds of spiritual stuff going on. So those two came hand in hand, the UFOs and the psychic stuff, which is why I started investigating ghosts and levitation and eventually Bigfoot, which is real.
That must have been one hell of a time then where you were like, whoa, what is going on? Like destroyed, really. So when you saw your mum, what point was it when you didn't see her? Was it you turned away and then she was gone, or?
No, I was staring at her until she was about 3 feet away from me, and I couldn't believe my eyes, and I just stared, and she pixelated away, kind of faded away. I'm like, wow, look at that. And having interviewed people who've seen apparitions, that does happen. But yeah, I've since had other ghostly experiences, and a wide variety. I'm count myself blessed for sure, because I've seen UFOs. 10 really good occasions, but 20 times probably. I was counting them up. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a little more than I thought.
That's amazing. I'm jealous in a respect. I'm probably not in another, because fear sometimes would take over me. But,
no.
The UFO part. Can you give us one of your UFO experiences that maybe you haven't talked about massively before, and just like run through that case?
Well, I've certainly talked about a lot of them. And one I do mention quite a bit is when a small orb came down in front of my car and I had missing time. So I'll kind of skip over that one, because a lot of people have heard that one. Another that I don't get as much opportunity to mention was when I was interviewing this lady who had had massive contact and was describing just the full-on ET babies and UFOs following her home and her whole neighborhood seeing them. I mean, it was a major case. And she described waking up and kicking one of the grays in the neck and killing it. And I kind of thought, okay. Travis Walton mentioned hitting an ET.
Right.
I think there are a few cases like that, but this is kind of new for me, and it was a lot to wrap my head around. And I always record my interviews, so I was transcribing my interview with her late at night. This is around 1994 or so. I was in my third-story condo, 600 square feet little condo, and got this incredible, I'm leaning back in my chair thinking, is she lying? No, I don't think she's lying, but I don't know if I can wrap my head around this.
Mm-hmm.
I knew she wasn't lying, but God, it was hard to believe. And I'm leaning back in my chair, and I got this really strong impulse. Go up on the roof, go up on the roof, go up on the roof. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. You're not allowed to go on the roof. And I'm a good boy. I follow the law. But I couldn't resist. It was an irresistible impulse. And weirdly, I grabbed my glasses. I'm nearsighted. I use them for driving. So I don't even know why I did that, but I did. And I grabbed my glasses and I went up onto the roof of my condo. And I had been up there maybe 10, 20 seconds tops. And I'm looking to the north over the little cemented LA River there.
Mm-hmm.
And about 100, 200 feet off real close, right over the street, right over these apartment building and palm trees, this light appeared. It was a large orange fiery light, oval, kind of white, orange, yellow. And it was moving a little bit, kind of like that, and it blasted me with this message in my head that wasn't clear English words, but a knowing. And the message was absolutely undeniable. I mean, I got the message, and it was, "Hi, we're Wendy's." That's not a real name, but I'll use a pseudonym. "We're Wendy's ETs. It's us. Hello. She's telling you the truth. It's all real. If you don't believe, watch this." And again, not in English, but just a bundle of, I don't even know how to describe it, just knowing. And this darn thing, which was still kind of just wavering there in the sky, darts to the left, and then to the right, and then to the left, and then go ding, 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 back and forth about 20 times. Like, look at what I can do. Watch this. Explain this away. I dare you. And of course, I fell back against the little wall there. I'm like, oh my God, look at this. But yeah, they gave me a telepathic message. And I had never in my life, at least not that I can recall, had that before.
And that craft was directly related to the person that you were transcribing from.
It sure was.
That one.
They said it. They said, "No, it's us. We're Wendy's ETs. She's real." I called her up afterwards. I'm like, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this. They told me you're telling the truth." And she kind of laughed. She's like, "What do you know I'm telling the truth?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but your story of this and that was a lot."
So let's link that then. How did she then send a telepathic message to those to say, "Go and tell Preston"? Or did they pick up on the fact that she had been talking to you and then decided just to come to you?
Yeah, they knew about me. And I've gotten later very clear evidence of this. She said earlier that ETs told her to talk to me, which I kind of took with a grain of salt. I've had that happen 4 times now, 3, 4 times. I'll say 3, but probably more. But no, she did not ask them. They did it on their own initiative. I asked her that, and she's like, no, I had no idea. And I'm like, I'd love to see them again. Can you do anything about that if you're in contact? Because she says, like, oh, I'm in constant contact with them. She's like, sure, I can try. And she calls me back later. She says, okay, they said to drive to the 210 freeway in Pasadena on this night, and they'll show up. I'm like, yeah, sure they will. Because I've done this before with other contactees. But, I'm like, maybe they will because, this happened. And so we went there. Her and I, my sister-in-law, and my nephew, my sister-in-law's son, who was like, 14 or something. So Wendy and I are walking up. We parked off the freeway and walked up this dirt road, a fire break up this hill in a very rural area. And Christy and James got separated from us. They were a couple of 100 yards down the path, and we reached this little plateau. And Wendy's like, well, this is where they said they would be. I'm like, oh, okay. And she screams and grabs my shoulders and whirls me around. And right next to us was an enormous gold sphere twinkling with these lights. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was exquisite. I've never seen anything like that, and it was so close.
And did you take your camera with you, or had you not thought about it?
No, I did. It was dangling around my neck the whole time, left alone, because when you see something like this, your eyes are glued to it, and it takes all your attention. I completely forgot about the camera. It wasn't important to me. I mean, it was, but I could not look away. I was absolutely riveted, literally riveted to this thing, which was, it could have been as far as 50 feet, but I'm going to say it's closer to 25 and about 10, 20 feet off the ground and as big as a small house, a large, large room, 20, 30 feet across. And hovering there, almost still, but not quite, ever so gently kind of hovering there, and stayed there for a good 10, 20 seconds, not long, and started to move very gently at about 2 miles, and then 3, and then 10, and then whoosh, this thing curled around the side of the mountain there in a split second. So fast I saw a tracer of this sort of gold light. It was
so did the other two with you see it then eventually? They caught up to then see it?
No, they walked up shortly after that, and we're like, breathless
Oh,
with
that's a
excitement.
shame.
Yeah.
So, do you think you've been abducted at some stage, hence why they know you, or do they just know you through whatever consciousness field?
Yeah, contacted. I'm not going to use that word because,
Okay.
um,
Sorry,
yeah,
that's just the term
no,
I
that's
use.
all right. I just think it's important to mention because this whole field is suffering from semantic disaster, and words matter. You know how we interpret this. But yeah, I absolutely think so. When I found out this was real, I started really scouring my past because it is in my family. My sister-in-law saw ETs, Greys. My other sister-in-law saw little blue beings. Two of my nephews have had very close encounters. One saw a humanoid in his bedroom. I never talked to my parents. I mean, I couldn't talk to my mom. It was too late. My dad vociferously denied any, anything to do with this, hated the subject, which to me was a little bit of a red flag because if you have a strong emotional reaction to this on either spectrum, I've learned that that can be a clue of contact. But I couldn't find anything in my childhood, really. But there was one missing time when I was about 9 years old, where I somehow missed lunch. And with, believe me, 5 brothers and sisters, and not a whole lot of food in the house, you don't miss lunch. I was so upset. And they're like, "Where were you?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I was here. How come you didn't call me?" Like, "We did call you."
All right. So, so knowing this, you've had these experiences. Have you then gone through the regression, or do you not believe in the regression scenario?
I haven't, because having talked to a lot of people who have done regression, some, I won't say regretted it, but were a little disappointed because what they got was a hypnotically recalled memory, which is different. Because a lot of people I talk to will have a trigger mechanism of some kind. They will see perhaps Whitley Strieber's book or any book on UFOs or a light in the sky or, it can be anything. And the memory comes flooding back. And that's how I'd really like to remember. And, I've had some of that with dreams. I've had dreams of being on board that are different from normal dreams, for sure. Because, dreams are somewhat, what would I say, mercurial. They're just flying all over. I mean, it's one thing from another. They're very illogical, whereas this was very vivid and very clear and continuous. So, yeah, I think hypnosis works in the right hands, but it can be badly abused too, because research on this shows that it absolutely works and that it can be very faulty. So it's kind of all over the map. And I caution contactees, I'm like, who really want to do it. I'm like, okay, if you have a clear-cut case of missing time and you have real anxiety, if you're having real troubles falling asleep perhaps, or sleeping without the light on, or you're just dead set, you have to know. It can be a very useful tool. But I say, let's do a few things first. Let's write everything down in absolute detail and keep going over that, because you can pull out new details that way. And let's meditate. Let's try meditation. Let's do dream work. Ask to dream about this incident, which I know people are like, well, that's a dream. I'm like, well, wait. Betty Hill, after her missing time encounter with Barney Hill, remembered the entire event in the dream state, later went through hypnosis, and uncovered exactly what she had already basically dreamt about. So it's a very effective tool. There's case after case that points towards that. So that I would take those 3 steps first. So, yeah, I think it works.
Are you actively looking to do that, or are you just leaving?
Yeah, I'm out of my mind with it. I am tired of not knowing, because I did have missing time. I had this orb come right down. It darted around, took off. I forgot the whole darn thing. It completely left my mind. I didn't even remember seeing the orb until some months later. And I'm like, what the heck? That did happen. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember what happened. Yeah, it's driving me a little bit crazy. And that was in 1992. It's time to remember.
Yeah, definitely. I see. I don't know if I could hold off as long as you going down to the regression route, because I have that immediate drive to want to know an answer.
I kind of wish that I had tackled this a little bit earlier. it is what it is. And
It is
since
what it
then
is.
I've had some real honest to God, full conscious experiences. So,
Rightio, we're back from a quick break. I want to talk about Ancient Aliens. You were on that recently. I saw you on that. That was quality. What's the recording process there? I mean, do they give you any lines, or do you just they give you a question and then you get to give your own words?
yeah, no, they gave me a list of about 100 topics they wanted to cover in detail. So I really appreciate that, because that doesn't always happen. They were great. I was really pleased with how it went. I've done quite a bit of TV over the years, and they flew me up to a hotel. I stayed 2 days and interviewed me for a couple of hours. And yeah, I very much appreciate it. They even paid my gas money and gave me, I think it was a couple of $100, nothing big, but yeah. And when they put me on, they didn't use the vast majority, but didn't butcher my testimony, which I have had happen in awful ways. I've had my words twisted to say exactly the opposite of what I said, which was infuriating. I've had some negative experiences with media. Once I was showing a landing site off. I'm like, this is where the UFO landed. And the interviewer's like, is that the landing hole right there? I'm like, no, that's a gopher hole. And he asked me, well, would you mind saying that that's a landing hole? And I looked at him in absolute shock. I'm like, yeah, I mind. It's a gopher hole. And he tried to trick me. He's like, would you put your hand in there? I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. So
That's terrible.
Yeah, I did have one show give me the list of questions and the answers too. It was scripted. And I'm like, I'm not doing that.
So Ancient Aliens did not do that?
No, they didn't. But one
good.
show
I'm pleased
did.
to hear that.
Yeah, one show did, and I'm not going to name them.
Oh, sure.
But I looked at the answers, and they were, along the lines of what I would have said. So I just kind of like rolled my eyes a little bit and like, you know what? I'll do my best. And basically pivoted when because they will they'll ask the same question over and over and over until I get the answer they want.
Yeah, that's indoctrination, isn't it?
I know a few researchers who will not work with some couple of these shows out there. Well, they're no longer active, but
well, that's where these long form talks come into their own, because any answer you give, you can give whatever amount of data you want, can't you? Unless I surreptitiously edit it down, what you have in your head is going to come across, and I don't edit these things down. I like to keep them long format.
And I appreciate the opportunity to go on TV. Don't get me wrong, because you get to reach a wide audience. And most of my experiences have been absolutely fine. But yeah, every now and then I'm not happy. And I've seen evidence of this with other people. There was once a case where they're talking about Jeff Greenhaw, who photographed ETs. And he did. He's a police officer who saw ETs in front of his cruiser and took pictures. And they're like, this is the picture Jeff Greenhaw took, the photos. It was not. I know what those photos look like, and what they showed was not what he saw or photographed. They lied. Like, why would you do that?
Well, who knows?
I don't understand why they twist the truth, because the truth is spectacular enough.
Well, the truth is always, like you say, it's always better than the stuff they make up. And that's all that people want is truth. It's that human condition of searching for the truth.
Yeah, like Fire in the Sky. They could have stuck to the original Travis Walton experience, and it would have been even better than what they put.
Oh, 100%.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I know, and I'm with you, and I'm pretty sure anyone who watches this who's seen that film would say the same thing. We're now going to branch off into an area I like to call the Koit zone. Koit zone! So in this zone, Preston, I'm going to ask you some random questions.
Uh-oh, all right.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit strange, but just answer the best you can. So, what's your favourite candy, what you would call in America?
Oh, gosh. Well, I've got a whole little thing of lemon drops here. I've been very much enjoying them.
Like sherbet lemons, are they? Oh, I love those.
Little standard old style lemon drops.
Good stuff. That's a great choice. What's the best way to eat chicken, if you do indeed eat chicken?
Chicken strips, little fingers, fried with barbecue sauce. Love them.
Get in. What place haven't you visited, but is on your would like to go to list?
Well, you'll like this one, England.
Oh, you never been?
No.
Wow.
I really would love to visit Europe, actually. Italy, Spain, France, and England.
Yeah, lots of history here, and if you know, at the crop circle thing, you could come at the right time and go to all those areas. That would be quality as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm coming your way soon, actually. Not to your house, by the way, so don't be worried. But just to the States. Kermit or Miss Piggy?
Well, it's not that easy being green, but I'm going to go with Kermit.
I would do too. Do you have any pets?
I have had pets throughout the years. Right now, I do have a cat and 2 dogs who are roaming around the house asking for food and wanting to come inside. So that might be growing.
Yeah, love me some dogs. Which TV shows are your favorites? And I wrote down here, and I'm assuming you like sci-fi. And I know you are because you said you're a Star Trek fan.
Yeah, I loved Star Trek. Probably my all-time favorite TV show was The Twilight Zone. But I love Amazing Race. I do, where they're running around the world. Yeah.
What's that one?
It's a TV reality show with, I don't know, 10 couples or so, 15, which are running around the world doing various tasks in Hungary and France and Europe and Australia and Africa, all over the world. It's really interesting because you get to see all the different cultures.
Sure.
That's what
I'll
I
look that
enjoy.
one up. I've not seen it. Any other series you're binging at the moment?
I binged Game of Thrones not too long ago, and boy, that was excellent.
It was excellent. What did you think of the last series?
I enjoyed it. I thought it ended well. I don't know why people were all up in arms about it.
No, I thought it was okay as well.
No, I think the books are much better. I love the books, and I'm still waiting for the last one from what's his name, George R.R. Martin. Better get it out. I'm tired of waiting.
Send him a strongly worded email. Post this. Walking on the beach, shoes or no shoes?
No shoes. If you're walking in shoes on the beach, you're missing the best part.
Fair play. My girlfriend does the same thing, and I always go with the shoes on. So she's going to give me some stick about that one. Where's the darkest place you've ever been?
Aha. The hellish realms when going out of body. I was curious.
Go on, explain.
I mean, anyone no worries. Anyone can have an out of body experience. It's not hard to do. I just want to preface that. And it's as safe as sleeping. There's a lot of fear surrounding it, but you can go to the heavenly realms. But yeah, I was curious because I'd read, other people do it. I think, well, why the heck can't I? Or the hell, I should say. Because they did it. And so I'm like, let's try this. And yeah, I went down to a real dark place where there were demonic entities with horrific appearances who were quite inflamed at my presence. I mean, they were angry and were coming at me hard. And this was after I'd practiced quite a bit on doing this. So I knew how to get out and react and protect myself. But yeah, that was dark. I don't think I'll be doing that again anytime soon. It was a little, well, not so much scary, but certainly unpleasant.
God, yeah. So that just reflects what we said earlier. Everything is about good versus evil.
I think, yeah, well, there's light, there's dark, there's hot, there's cold.
Everything, there's balance. Yeah.
There's a weird sort of interplay with the entire universe. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, me too. Last question on this. What else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
Oh, gosh. Well, gardening. I love writing, of course, and reading. And I do like watching some TV with some chicken fingers and mashed potatoes.
And what are you growing at the moment?
Excuse me?
What are you growing in the garden? Is it food or is it flowers?
Mostly food, plants, lettuce, some scallions. I'm absolutely addicted to scallions recently. I don't know why.
I don't even know what a scallion is.
Long green onions.
Okay.
They're delicious.
Never heard that phrase before. Fair play.
But yeah, planning on growing a wide variety of vegetables and just planted two peach trees, 2 apple trees, got a plum tree, and we have a cherry tree.
Pear.
And pears and lemons, the whole deal. We have an
That's
orchard
amazing.
before we're done.
We've got all of those, apart from the lemon tree, because it's not hot enough to grow a lemon. But they were growing well for the first couple of years, and then this year, black fly, white fly, green fly, you name it, all destroyed the lot of them.
Oh no!
I know. Swines! I find gardening can be like that. One year it's amazing, the next year it's really poor. Hey ho. Okay.
Well, the weather's all over the map these days.
Yeah,
I
it's
wish
true.
It would stop raining.
What are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on about 3 or 4 books. One is called Supernatural Survival, tales of people whose lives were saved as a result of supernatural intervention.
That's cool.
A second one on my out-of-body experiences. I already put out one. I'm working on Not From Here, Volume 5, which is an ongoing series about the very unusual, outlying, bizarre UFO cases. Another one about humanoid encounters. I want to put out a second volume of Symmetry and really dig deep because, boy, this lady has had every UFO experience you can imagine. So yeah, I'm busy. I've always got many irons in the fire.
That one has intrigued me, this Symmetry one, and that lady you talked about. I'm definitely going to have to get into that one. Any TV appearances coming up?
Well, I just did Ancient Aliens and The Unexplained with William Shatner.
Oh, cool.
Which went well. I was pleased. I did Josh Gates, his show with I forget what it's called. No planned TV appearances at this point, but every now and then I get an email and I'm like, okay, let's see. I love doing those because it's different, it's interesting. But yeah, I'm kind of a shy guy. You might not think so, but it's disconcerting when you have a camera in front of your face that's larger than your head and lights all around you and 10 people on the other side. So
well, you always come across well. I've seen you on a shed load of podcasts, like even on things like Midnight in the Desert, and I've listened to a lot of your stuff, and you never seem to come across shy. So you're doing well, putting on that brave face.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I've gotten better over the years.
Very much so. Practice makes perfect. Thanks ever so much for your time. I know I've kept you a long time now. We're talking just slightly over 2 hours, but it's really appreciated. I've always wanted to meet, whether it be in person or digitally, with a ufologist, and now I have ticked that item off my bucket list. So thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you.
It's an honor and a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To watch other episodes of KoitCast, or indeed animations I've made, click the image top middle. Click the image top left to download some of my songs, and click the image top right to subscribe to my channel. And make sure you tick that notification bell so you never miss an upload.